I want to open it up. There's a lot of ideas wrapped up in what you've just heard from Chuck, and certainly what you heard earlier from Jay Ash. And the notion of the people-centered design is really a critically important issue that I think all of us are wrestling with. So why don't we open it up, get some reactions from folks, let Chuck and others interact with each other. We'll start here, yeah. Why don't you identify yourself, where you're from, what you do, sure, in 2 sentences, and then pop your question.
Sure. It's my name is Peter Graham. I'm the director of real estate at a CDC in the Greater Boston area in Cambridge. But my question, you started off your presentation about I think it was Reamer and how you overbuilt in a way. And so the kind of question is where's Reamer now? It has been maybe 15 years, but this seemed like this was your awakening to maybe how we're getting this wrong, and is it now going to be 15 years from now that they're in the same position only with a bigger bill?
Yeah. I'm sorry I didn't close that loop. I didn't mean to start with that one, but I was kind of inspired by the talk before to bring that one up. I actually went back to graduate school and got a planning degree. Left the engineering firm I was with right after the Reamer project was done. And I felt really good about what I had done. I mean, I felt like I had solved their problem, right? Like I'm not joking to you. I got a big bonus from my office, and they had Chuck Marohn Day at the city. I'm not exaggerating. They did. And I felt really good about what I did. As I was going through planning school, it started to occur to me that maybe this wasn't such a great idea. And I actually had the opportunity in 2005 to go back there to do planning work for them. I started my own planning company when I was in graduate school. That's what I did between engineering and strong towns. And they hired me. Chuck, we love you. You're doing planning now? Come back. We got a grant to do a plan. And I went back and I sat down with them and, okay, guys, what are your dreams for the future? Well, we'd like a community center, and we'd like a better park, and and they had all these like wants. And I started looking at it going, oh my gosh, you are just have a ticking, you haven't added a single business since I've left. You've actually lost population. You've just aged. Your median age is gone up. You're not adding any young people. This is a catastrophe. And they were responding to the grant programs with this like list of things they wanted to do. The plan that I was working on was actually funded by a foundation. And the reason they were doing the plan is because the foundation would give grants to cities to do things, but you couldn't get a grant unless you had a plan. So they paid them to do the plan, and they paid them. So I sat down with them and I said, look, we've got this huge problem, and we kind of laid it out. And at one point we had the moment where they said, yeah, this is really bad. But we want a community center, and we got to go, And that was, that second encounter was actually the epiphany moment for me, because that was like 2004 or 5 when I was, and that was where I thought, okay, someone else would have done it if I hadn't. So, I say it's me, but it's this, we just destroyed this city. We ensured that this city will not survive. And they have a limited shelf life right now. In Minnesota, we have 854 cities. We did a study early on at Strong Towns where we looked at the vulnerability of these cities in terms of losing state aid. If they lost the state aid they were getting, which it was, at the time, they were going to cut all state aid. So we said, if they lose state aid, how vulnerable are they? And out of 854 cities, they were ranked 250 something. So there were 250 cities more fragile than them. And they were toast. They're done. Like they have they cannot maintain 2 blocks of what they built. So this, there's a certain spectrum of city that we need to have a very serious conversation about how we change the fundamental economics if they're going to stick around. Because that little town will not. There is no, even if they had all the love for their place in the world, there's no way for it to stick around unless we change their economic model.
I'm Ivy Van, and I'm the planning board chairman from Peterborough, New Hampshire. And I have a question about the Strode Road street problem. We just had what ought to be a very productive street in town repaved and rebuilt and new water mains put underneath it, which was a good thing. The water mains were pretty sucky. The problem is we had a meeting with an engineer, a very well thought of engineering firm. Everyone in the audience said, we want a street. The houses on this street are 5 and 10 and 15-foot setbacks. This street goes to the town playground and the town pool. We do not want the cars to drive fast here. We want the cars to drive slow. I said, could we have a 10-foot traffic lane? And the engineer says, and so the upshot is, we told them what they wanted. They built a Strode. Can we fix this with paint?
I'll let Chuck take a shot at that, and then I have my own thoughts.
Yeah, I'd like
Go
to
for
hear
it.
that. Well, okay, two things right off the bat. Yes, you do need to fix it, and you can fix it. It's not optimum. I mean, it would have been better had you done it right the first time. But there are ways to go about calming the traffic down and fixing that. I think the more important thing, though, especially for this like larger audience. So yes, there's some hope. Go try things and go out with a radar gun. And the idea is that engineers set speed based on what they call the 85th percentile speed. So they go out and just like blindly build something and then go and say, well, what are people driving? Okay, that's what we'll set the speed limit at. As opposed to say, what is the speed we want people to drive, and let's create an environment that induces that speed. That's what you're going to do. You're going to say, here's what we want the target speed to be, so what do we need to do to get down to that? But here's a larger point. You need to fire your engineer. Right. Yeah. And I say that, I don't say that flippantly, and I don't say that to be pejorative. There are good engineers out there who are capable of delivering what you're asking for. And if you're not finding them, you need to just keep looking.
Just to add a couple thoughts, and I agree completely. You can fix that. My favorite example of how to fix something like that, anybody been in the Times Square area in Manhattan in the past 3 years? So I was involved doing work after I left government here. I ended up doing a fair amount of work with Michael Bloomberg and his troops in New York City. And among other things, Jeanette Sadiq-Khan was their transportation commissioner, really talented woman. And the conversation started to revolve around what to do about the traffic congestion and the sidewalk congestion in Midtown Manhattan, because the sidewalks were literally too full and people were getting hit by cars when they were walking the street. And the proposal that they came up with was to shut down Broadway in Midtown. Now, Broadway, if you think about Manhattan, it's a grid, linear, cross streets, avenues, and Broadway slices across them on a diagonal. And the notion was, well, Broadway, it's a terrific corridor. Turns out it's sort of a Strode in the center of the city. But it's a disaster from a traffic engineering perspective, because instead of creating linear grid intersections, it creates an intersection that has a diagonal and a linear grid. And so you get traffic lights that have to deal with the diagonal traffic, the cross traffic, the main through traffic. And so they shut Broadway down in the center around Times Square. And the way they did that, this is to your question of can you use paint, they didn't go and block it off with all kinds of elaborate stuff. They put a bunch of beach chairs out and a bunch of cafe tables, and the traffic guys went out in a day. I was with Bloomberg and Jeanette when this was going on, and he was saying, this is not going to work, and I'm really upset about this. They went out one night, the night before it was going to get closed, and they painted it tan, all the area that was formerly street, asphalt. They painted it tan, and they spread sand on it, which stuck to it, so it looked like a beach. And then they put all these chairs and cafe tables out overnight. And then they woke up the next morning, and everyone went, so what's going to happen? And what happened was like 400 million New Yorkers started sitting in those chairs in the middle of the street. And there was no traffic because it was full of chairs and people.
Right.
And the whole thing worked like a charm. And if you go back to them today and say, oh, no, we're going to reopen Broadway, there would be a revolution in New York City. You could do the same thing. If you go to Europe, people put cafe tables in the middle of the street. They simply say, this is ours. It belongs to the people. We're not going to let the cars own it. By the way, and Chuck's comment, fire your engineer. Absolutely. You also need to deal with, when we were in government, the first thing that we did, the woman that did it for me is now at the Volpe Center. She's just done the similar thing for California. We rewrote our highway design manual. The highway design manual is the Bible for engineers and the engineering profession. It's what tells them you need 12-foot travel lanes, even though you want the cars to go 20 miles an hour, which is patently absurd to have a 12-foot travel lane. You need to rewrite the highway design manual. The one in New Hampshire is terrible. It's terrible. The one in Massachusetts, really pretty darn good. I think the one in Minnesota is marginal. We're just working on the one in California. That needs to be dealt with. But you need to seize control as a community. I was in Keene a couple weeks ago. They're downtown. Their streets, they had a Strode in the middle of town, and now they've got a beautiful downtown streetscape. You can take it back. You need to take it back. You can start with paint. Use cafe tables. Use bulb outs. Use all the stuff that makes those cars go 20 rather than 40.
If I just,
ahead.
like, real quick, a couple of local things. Dan, stand up for a sec. Dan Bartman, one of my good friends back here, works in Somerville, and they've done some amazing stuff along this line. I'm going to volunteer him if you want to chat with him. He can at least point you in the right direction. Jason, stand up in the back. Jason DeGray is a professional engineer, another friend of mine who's here today. This is one of the guys who is trying to do things differently. I'm not doing this to promote him in a sense, but you fire your engineer and you hire someone who knows what they're doing, and the other engineering firms will start to do things differently. We got to get them all doing this.
Right.
There's a book that came out in March called Tactical Urbanism that is like a guidebook to some of this thinking, and I can't recommend it enough. So if you want a quick read, check that one out.
Great book. And the other one to check out is the NACTO guide, which is the big city. Now, the big cities have done it, but little cities can use all that stuff too. The National Association of City Traffic or Transportation Association, whatever, NACTO, N-A-C-T-O. Go on. They have a very, very interesting street design, urban setting design, which works in small towns and big towns, and it's full of this kind of stuff. Next questions. Yeah, we got a whole bunch. Yeah, over here, left.
Hi, Brian Clements. I'm an engineer and a farmer. Live in Boxborough. We're working on updating our master plan. So the question is about how you calculated the revenue from these areas, your dollars per acre. At first, I thought that was tax revenue per acre, but there seems to be more to it because you talked about the cost of sewer. So what goes into that calculation?
The first maps that I showed you were literally value per acre. It's simple division, the value divided by the acreage. There's many different ways to break that out and look at it. You can convert that into revenue. Revenue is actually pretty easy to get. In Lafayette, that study has taken 18 months. It'll be $150,000 by the time we're done. It's a really deeply intricate, detailed cost and revenue model. And that's asking a more sophisticated set of questions. Here's the interesting thing about that. At the end of the day, the $150,000 model is giving us the same results as the simple division. There's a high correlation, because what the simple division is your revenue. And what the really expensive, intricate one is looking at all the costs and the intricate costs. But we intuitively understand that if you have to pump your sewage 23 times, it costs more than if it's just by gravity. If you build on the high ground and you don't have to have intricate stormwater systems, but you build in the low bayou, and you do, it's going to cost more in the bayou. If you live 8 miles out of town, you've got 8 miles of street. If you live here, you've got 2 blocks. We kind of intuitively get that it costs more. The model shows that. It strongly correlates to the just easy revenue model that you can do yourself with third grade math.
So it's either a property value or a revenue model.
Yeah, I
one
would
or the
use,
other?
if you can do the revenue model, that's the best, but property values is equivalent, is pretty good too. And it's basically like a quick, dirty approximation of the total expense model that we did for Lafayette. And they correlate exactly. I mean, the places that we're showing are the highest value per acre are also the lowest cost per foot and are the most productive.
Our best example of that back in my day in government was, we always use Concord as an example for people, the paradigmatic New England town, where Concord had adopted zoning that basically made it illegal to build Concord again. And the
We love
downtown.
our place.
Yeah,
No,
we
we
love this
can't do
place.
it.
We'll never do it again. And so the downtown of Concord, the traditional New England village of Concord, town square, town center, shops and housing above the shops, dense, was completely illegal under their current zoning, but was by far the most valuable part of Concord. By far, just on the simple, just add up the property value. And so you sit down with Concord or any other community that we're all dealing with, and you say, do you want to look like this, which is what we built 200 years ago and is still the best stuff we got, and is, by the way, the most valuable stuff we got? Or do you want to look like this, 2-acre minimum lot size, sprawly location, very poor revenue generator, very high cost, very low value compared to the traditional stuff? So, and you can do that in virtually any community that any of you come from. You can do that math very simply. Just and then show people pictures. Ann Tate. Okay, this is going to be a really good question.
Thank you. I'm Ann Tate from Somerville.
So
I'm
Ann
a
Tate,
former colleague and employee of Doug's.
Wonderful.
And I'm going to give a better introduction. She's too modest. So Ann is a professor at the Rhode Island School of Design, one of the leading land use experts that I know. When I went into government, Ann joined our administration as our chief thinker on a lot of the stuff that we did on smart growth. And she and I have since done all kinds of things in one of our favorite cities, Somerville, where Ann is still a longtime resident. So Ann.
Uh-oh. Now the pressure's on. Thank you, Doug. I wanted to build on the question asked about Boxford and these interesting, I think the stuff about the streets, a lot of us have been working on this, as Doug says. I think the valuation question is really dynamic and transformative potentially. But when the examples you showed were not Concord. They were crappy little strips of underperforming half-dead towns, and still it's true.
Right.
So that's very interesting, and I'm assuming that it is partly the multiplicity of buildings in a block and of businesses in a block as opposed to the single. And but what do we do now to capitalize on that understanding and to bring new development into those places? I understand that we don't want to be building where we have to put all this infrastructure cost in. We want to be capitalizing on the investment we have and the streetscapes we have. But do you have anything to say about how we can revitalize some of those places more?
Probably we could probably talk for hours and hours. I think maybe as just like a big framing kind of picture concept, what we're really talking about to make those places better is focusing on the small increment of investment. And the big problem we have today is that largely our top-down government programs and a large swath of our developers who have kind of adapted to that, and then a large swath of our corporations that have adapted to that, have a really hard time working at the fine grain. It's not because they're evil, it's not because they're bad, it's not because they have poor intentions. I'm just saying they're used to working at a different scale in a different way. In Minnesota, we had this thing in the 70s called the Minnesota Miracle, where we went through and we said, hey, we have 854 different cities. They all have their own taxing structure. They all have their own regulating structure. They all have their own like nuances. And it's really not a very business-friendly thing, because if you're a business and you want to open another town, you got to figure all that out. What we're going to do is we're going to have like one taxing structure for the state, one kind of overarching regulatory structure for business, and what we will do is we will then share that revenue back. We'll collect it here, share it back, and help fund your local police and fire and all that stuff. We had this explosion of growth. It worked tremendously well because now if you were McDonald's and you wanted to open in the next town, you didn't have to go to the next town and figure out all their stuff. You just had like one code the whole way to go. It was like efficient. What we lost over the subsequent generation was the local nuance. So there's this pendulum of, top-down efficient, but what we at Strong Towns call orderly but dumb, and the other side, which is chaotic but smart. We kind of had a pendulum and go back and forth. And what we need to do is inject some chaotic but smart systems back into place. Those are going to be zoning, they're going to be tax systems, they're going to be incentive models. One of the things that we're working on right now, we have a group of developers with the CNU who are these really small, they do one building at a time or two buildings at a time. They're not doing large subdivisions. And those are the people that, what we're doing is going out and telling people, the developer you're looking for might just be you. It might not be like convincing the developer that's there to do things different. It might not be attracting a new developer to come into your community. It might actually be you. And being a developer is really not that hard. So here's the things you can do to be your own local developer and focus on those small incremental improvements. And I think a country where instead of having, 500 large development companies, we had 100,000 small developers working in little cities is a really strong country.
It's kind of a new economy model.
It is very much so.
I just wanted to say one other thing, which is Doug's example and the example you just gave are the perfect argument for why Jay Ash should support zoning reform in Massachusetts.
Right, yeah. And not just federal standards should be our be-all and end-all. Yes, ma'am, in the front.
Hi.
Yes, here it comes.
Hi, my name is Catherine Tumber. I work at Northeastern University, and I wrote a book called Small, Gritty, and Green, The Promise of America's
I read
Smaller
your book.
Industrial Cities. Yes, and we've met once before.
We did, I remember now.
In Buffalo.
Thank
at
you.
CNU. Yeah.
Yep.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Family reunion.
Great talk. Yes.
I recognize your name as soon as you said it. Yep.
In any case, I wanted to ask, these Strodes developed somewhat in something of an evolutionary incremental way too.
Mm-hmm.
They started out with street widening, which cut into sidewalks, and tree canopy. And I'm wondering if you have any experience, Chuck, with re-engineering these in a way that restores sidewalks and tree canopy and restores sidewalks, and in the process losing a lane of thoroughfare. And if so, I'm wondering how it was that whoever was involved with this overcame what I would imagine to be tremendous political obstacles.
Right. I was a bad engineer, so I don't do any projects myself anymore. But I know of many. I've worked with people who have done these things. I think the New York, the Times Square example is a great one because the petrified fear was that when you gave a bunch of space over to people and lost those car lanes, that there was going to be horrible congestion. Well, there was horrible congestion at the beginning.
Right.
There's somewhat still congestion now, but what is there? There's a ton of people there, and they've taken over the space and they won't give it back. You can literally go to Google, do a search for road diets, and you will get example after example after example, hundreds of examples of cities around this country, from California, where they have a real deeply embedded, auto culture, to the Northeast, where you have a lot more. I just think natural, clay to work with in terms of great cities. You'll find examples from all of those where they've, in one swath, gone in and remade a corridor with fewer lanes, with narrower lanes, with more trees. Here's the disclaimer on that, though. I think that those are great, and when you can take those opportunities to re-engineer a street to be a great place, take it, right? But oftentimes we're paralyzed waiting for the huge grant to come through, the big project to go through, the DOT to come back with the rebuild, whatever it is. And, you know, the woman in back that asked the question first, yeah, you've got a problem now that can't, if you wait, is not gonna be solved for 30 years. So you gotta go do something now. So the question really becomes, what's the next, and this is the question that we say you gotta ask every day, what is the next smallest thing we can do to make this a little bit better? What is the next smallest thing we can do? And if you ask yourselves that across all the broad problems you have day after day after day, you'll take tiny little steps and you'll make progress. And you'll look back a decade from now and say, oh my gosh, we've slowly transformed this place.
As an interesting addition to that,
Please.
The Strode thing and how do you take them back and can you start with a can of paint? You clearly can. If you think about Newbury Street, right up the road here, Newbury Street in Boston, one of the great shopping districts of Boston, that's a 4-lane road. That's a 4-lane road. But 2 of them are parking lanes. And people are getting in and they're parallel parking lanes. So people are getting in and out of those cars all the time. Doors are opening. No one goes 50 on Newbury Street. No one. If you're lucky, you go 20. Now, there are traffic lights and intersections and pedestrians, but the pedestrians have basically taken back Newbury Street. That was a 4-lane road. If you think about, one of my favorite devices is angled parking. Angled parking takes up a lot of space. You can fit a lot of cars in angled parking. All it is a paint can. And then people are backing out of those spaces, so it's really, talk about buffering and traffic calming. You're forcing the cars to deal with the fact that people are pulling in and out of angled parking spaces. Keene, New Hampshire has angled parking in a bunch of places. Oh, God bless them. And that was a can of paint. So there are a bunch of things you can do. I mean, and then you can get much more elaborate and you build the sidewalks further out and you do the bulb outs and all your other, and you take the lanes away completely and turn. But you can start with the paint can, and you need to start with the paint can. It's really, it is the simplest, easiest thing to do, and remind people. And the thing that used to drive me crazy about traffic engineering was, as Chuck said, the engineers would do the 85th percentile, so they go out and speed gun people. People were already driving too fast on the road. In Massachusetts, until we changed the law, they would go out, build a road, 12-foot travel lane, 6-foot shoulders, way too fast in a town center. The cars would, and then they'd put a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit on it. Everyone went 40.
Right.
They go out and ping it. Everyone's going 40. They raised the speed limit because the law required them to raise the speed limit. Right. And this was Doug McGarrett's fault, I'm sure. I can blame him. And so we had to change the law saying, no, actually, no, you're not going to change the speed limit. You're going to leave it at what you want them to be. But the real key is you got to design the road right in the get-go, and you can't screw it up. Hire these engineers that know how to do this right and change the practice. Next questions. Yes, over here. We'll go to this side. Well, let me give Doug McGarrett, this is his chance to respond.
I had nothing to do with the speed limits. I'm a partner over at Foley Hoag and land use attorney, and I wanted to follow up on the dynamic pricing.
Well, he's not giving a full description. He used to be you were general counsel, a bunch of chief of staff back when Fred Salvucci was Secretary of Transportation in the state, one of the great transportation thinkers we've ever had. Doug was there and all the rest.
And working closely with Doug, so that, anyway. But I wanted to follow up on your comments about dynamic pricing. The truth is that in Boston and in Massachusetts, we do not have that, that we have a single fare for our transit system.
Oh, really? Okay.
Right, it's a fare that has no elasticity and in fact is less likely to be collected on commuter rail during peak hours because the conductors can't get through the trains because they're so crowded and people ride for free.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you, because you stated the obvious wisdom of dynamic pricing as if it were an assumption in a great advanced city like Boston.
Right.
And if you could elaborate a little bit on the benefits that can be realized from that. And Doug, I thought you might have a few comments on this issue as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I guess I did, maybe as a compliment to all of you, assume that you were You were there as well, yeah. I apologize. We all understand that if you want to fly on an airline on the day before Thanksgiving or, the 23rd or 24th of December, you're going to pay a premium price. Why? Because everybody wants to fly then, and there's only a finite number of seats. And it's not that the airlines are gouging you. The way that the airlines correlate supply and demand is through price. That's what a market system is all about. And if the price goes too high, people won't fly then. They'll make other arrangements. Or if the price goes high enough, they'll provide more capacity. That's the market. That's the market system. If you ride the metro, say, in DC, or you ride, any of the rail lines that I've been on in New York City, if you're going to ride during peak hour, you can pay more. And so, like, I had to go one day from New York City to DC, and I run a nonprofit. We are a pretty bare bones operation. I would rather sacrifice sleep than money. So the ticket at the time I was planning to go was about $60 more than the ticket at 5 a.m. So I'm on a train at 5 a.m. With a bunch of cheapskates like me. This is transit system we can adjust like this dynamically. And there's issues of equity and there's issues of people who have difficulty affording. We can deal with that, in this system as well. But the idea of pricing is to send a clear signal as to when the demand is, and use that as a way to really fund your system. I think the interesting thing, and there are states experimenting this. Minnesota is one. We're a very infant experiment. But you go to Oregon and they have more advanced experiments where they're actually looking at congestion pricing on roadways. So if you want to drive during those most congested periods of time on the most congested roadways, there's a higher charge than if you wanted to go somewhere, at a different time. There's a certain American sense of entitlement that bucks against. Yet I think the easiest way to sell it to politicians, or the way that I've heard it explained where I saw political people go, oh, okay. You have the plumber who has the job 20 minutes away with regular flow of traffic, but now it's 90 minutes away because of congestion. They can't get there. They would much rather pay the $10 toll to ride during the peak time to get there and make that job. And so what you're doing is you're actually providing opportunities for people to use the system as it's designed, with price as the mechanism to balance those two. Again, I realize that there's social equity issues. The other thing with the congestion pricing is there's privacy issues that people get into. I'm not saying that there's ready, easy solutions for those, but there are things to talk about. And I think we've proven we can't build our way out of congestion. And when you can't build your way out of congestion, the intelligent way to nuance congestion is through a balance of supply and demand through a price mechanism.
I took Uber here this morning. All of us, or many of us, are probably Uber fanatics now. I'm a big believer that these guys are going to help us get dynamic pricing embedded across all these systems. You think about a transit system, it is a fixed asset. We make them bigger over time, but basically you're talking about a limited resource. It's nuts to price it at a fixed price all the time. It's just nuts. It's totally upside down economics. Uber has congestion pricing, and some of us complain about it. Oh my God, it's twice what. But no, of course it's twice what it is other times when it's raining and everyone's trying to get an Uber. And we're all getting pretty comfortable with that. And my guess is we're going to find that these guys, and I already use my MBTA commuter rail stuff comes on this. It won't be hard for the MBTA to say at 7:30 in the morning, here's your price. At 8:15, here's your price. At 10 o'clock, here's your price. And it's just gonna happen as a given in these devices. And we'll end up with the same thing with VMT and a bunch of other things. We're going to use these things as a core technology to make that possible.
The Uber one is fascinating because people have complained a lot about the price going up in rain. Like one example. And, I think in San Francisco and in DC both, they've said Uber's not, you can operate here Uber, but you can't do that. Right. And what happens? I mean, you're allowed to do it here, right?
Right.
So it's raining. So what does that mean? That means more people want to take a taxi than want to walk because it's raining, right? So the price goes up. What happens? Are they gouging you? No. What they're doing is they're trying to entice all those Uber drivers that are sitting on their couch watching TV to get out in the rain and come pick you up. And they're saying, we're going to pay you more to get out here because there's so much demand. Those are really smart systems.
Yeah, exactly.
Really smart systems.
Exactly. Okay, over here. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Josh Ostroff. My day job, I do transportation advocacy for a statewide coalition, Transportation for Massachusetts. But my interesting night job, I'm a selectman in Natick, and I wanted to engage you on how we actually make some of these changes happen through a process of civic engagement, where many communities are governed by town meeting, or as I call it, a ruling mob, where there are no unexpressed thoughts, and you're and you're elected to get to a 2/3 quantum of vote because you have a recognizable last name. So I mean, there's not a lot of expertise, and I think, in speaking to Robin about my expectations for today, it would be helpful to have like elevator. Well, we don't have a lot of elevators in Natick, but to be able to have concise conversations with people on the benefits of a more thoughtful approach to urban planning. And I guess you can't even use the word urban planning in towns in Massachusetts. Right. But this is a huge challenge for us because it comes to the point of how do you persuade your neighbors that density does not necessarily mean more traffic, or that streets designed for everyone actually will allow you to accumulate more wealth and support the investments we need to make in schools. How everything sort of has to fit together when you make these decisions. So
Right.
is that enough to go on? Do you understand some of the concerns that we have when we try to lead our communities into a future and
Right.
deal with a lot of fear and distrust?
Go ahead.
No, I'm not going to answer the question yet. I'm going to let Chuck do it. But this is a great segue, so I think we're going to close with this answer. I'm sorry we're going to be running out of time, but what will come of this is I'm going to ask Seth Theron to come up and describe what CNU's agenda is and how it's making available resources to try to deal with some of these issues and help you deal with these issues in a very direct way. But let's let Chuck respond to your question. Then I have some Natick thoughts as well. So
I mentioned earlier the orderly but dumb versus chaotic but smart approach. And, we all intuitively reject dumb and want smart, right? But we also all have a very strong preference for orderly over chaotic. If you ever sat at a traffic signal at 10 at night, you realize how strong our desire for order is, and we'll sacrifice dumb, we'll sacrifice smart for that. So part of the pendulum going back and forth is the chaotic messiness of local governance. I think there's no answer to this. I mean, there's no way to fix that. And really, you guys are the original, we all look to you as the inspiration for this, right? Like the town hall meeting and all that. I mean, there's a deep in the heritage here. Yet, the way our government has evolved, one of the big problems that we struggle with is that we've delegated certain questions and answers to the wrong level of government. And I'll pick on environmental rules for just a minute. A lot of environmental rules, I don't know an environmental rule that is not, the inspiration of it is not justifiable or needed, right? What happens with the environmental rules is always how they're carried out. And a lot of our environmental rules and a lot of our zoning rules delegate a ton of authority to very small groups of people to have vetoes over really large things that impact all of us. Conversely, and we've actually called this the chicken problem, because the way it manifests a lot of times is with backyard chickens. We see a lot of things that are really block level and neighborhood level problems that are brought up to the city, town, sometimes the region, and even the state level. Should you be able to have chickens in your backyard? well, that's really an issue between you and your neighbors. Yet we often make that like a bigger issue. Again, I don't think there's a way to solve the complexities of people rolling up their sleeves and working together. I'm reading right now the book you recommended. Which one is it called? The Wordy Pilgrims. It's a hilarious book. It's really brilliant. Serval, yeah. But it's about like the original people that were here and all the bickering and squabbling back and forth that they had with much simpler lives than what we have. I think that this is just part of the human experience. I think what we can do to make it a little bit better is to intentionally ask ourselves, at what level should this decision actually be made? And resist our temptation to elevate things higher up than they should be, and resist kind of the patronizing notion of devolving decisions down when we don't want to make them.
Great answer. Natick's one of my favorite examples of a community that has really pretty much transformed itself over the past 30 years. As I've watched it, Natick reinvested in a lot of its beautiful brick downtown buildings. You got a great old library, you added a new library. You sort of, you refocused on the fact that the downtown, the center of Natick, around the Common and all the rest was where you really wanted to get people to go. You built a lot of housing near the train station. You got all kinds of things going on. So it's always intrigued me that it's, because town meeting is such a challenge to get this stuff through, that you guys have done as well as you've done. I'm a big admirer of all that's been accomplished. I know there's a lot left to do. I've always thought that the state screwed up a lot of Natick by having Route 9 as bad as it is going through the side of your community when you have the really interesting stuff in the center. But I know there's someone desperate to ask. Okay, we'll let this one be the last one, then I want to turn it over to Seth. Okay, you just, irresistible, your hand.
My name is Kathleen Grazer, and I'm not a professional planner. I am a community preservation activist, and I live in an affluent western suburb, I'm sure inner suburb of Boston, and our city is almost $1 billion in debt in unfunded liabilities for pensions and post-employment health care benefits.
What's your city?
Newton.
Okay.
And the residents of Newton see the problems very clearly, and we know that we need a stronger commercial tax base. We have almost no commercial tax base. We're drowning in bedrooms. And we want to preserve our historic village centers, those streetscapes, and we want to bring high-skills employers to employ the highly educated people who live in Newton. We want a more balanced economy. Unfortunately, every kind of development that gets proposed is luxury, high-density housing under the guise of affordable housing. We've satisfied our 1.5 land area minima under Chapter 40B. We want to get control of our planning. We can't get recognition from the state that we've done it. We're accused of being NIMBYs when all we want to do is have rational planning that keeps our middle class from being gutted. It's being eviscerated. We're getting more and more luxury units, more and more luxury housing. A handful of people win a lottery and they get into that housing, but it's more and more becoming the land of the millionaires who can afford to buy enough property to protect themselves from high density, and those people who have no choice but to go into units. And I feel like it's degrading democracy, it's degrading participation in public life, it's hurting our community. And
So your question?
my question is, what do we do? Because you were talking about how the decisions have to be made at the right level. The decisions are being made at the state level that impact us. We can't control our own destiny.
Not everybody in Newton would agree with that.
Well, obviously,
Yeah.
this is another one of those where I think, if we sat down at a table
Yeah.
with a bunch of people from you and we would be able to talk for days
Yeah.
about the myriads of complexity. One thing that you said that really struck me, and you didn't go in this direction, and I was kind of nervous that you were going to. You started with the whole pension thing, and I'm a lot of what is inspiring us today to do some really ridiculous, crazy things is to try to solve unsolvable financial problems.
Exactly.
To me, I would, to the extent possible, try to separate the discussions on the unsolvable financial problems from the questions of how do we want to live and how do we want this place to be and function. You know, in the Northeast here in this country, you have the way the country's financial problems are manifesting is way different than in other parts of the country. You will be just fine. You know, when California defaults on their pensions, California cities are left with places that are insolvent even without the pensions. There's not enough tax base to maintain everything they built. You have cities that are fundamentally much closer to sound. So I think you need to separate those issues and not let the one inspire you to do things that are very short-term on the other. And as far as like, what do you do? The massive complexities that are involved in what you're talking about, you know, mean I can't give you like there's no simple answer. But I think if you're being inspired and if the push is we have to do A, B, C, and D, and those all seem ridiculous to us, but if we don't do it, we've got this huge problem, you need to separate those two.
No,
Very-
that's not what I described.
I'm going to have to stop. I'm sorry, but you can pick this up afterwards. I want to thank everyone for being here. I'm sure that there's much to discuss going forward. In particular, I want to congratulate and thank Chuck for his
Thank you.
presentation, which is fantastic.